The pre-patch and Shadowlands are just around the corner at this point, so I thought it was a good time to talk about the things that have changed for classes, or at least the biggest things that have changed, because for some of you, your class and spec will feel very similar to how it does now. So just to clear a few things up, first of all, in terms of corruption, that's not going to be something we have moving into Shadowlands. That is actually going away in the pre-patch. So make any use of the corruption you've got now, enjoy it while it lasts, because that is going to be completely removed off the gear that you have. You'll still have the gear, but you just won't have the corruption in the pre-patch. Similar story for Azerite and Essences. They will work in the pre-patch, but once we get to Shadowlands content, they will no longer work in the Shadowlands. You'll still be able to use them in things like Time Walking or in Azeroth content, so it'll still be worth keeping them for the most part, but you'll just have very niche uses on where you can use them now. In terms of what will replace the player power lost in the pre-patch and moving into Shadowlands, it's going to work very similar to the last couple of expansions where we'll get more borrowed power, and that'll come in the form of Covenant abilities first of all. This will be a new ability you'll gain based on the Covenant you choose once you're done with leveling. You'll also have Soulbinds and Conduits. These will be NPCs in your Covenant that will give you like a tree that you'll have access to. You'll unlock the tree and there'll be unique perks to that NPC, or there'll also be blank slots where you can put in your own power, like 5% Fist of Fury damage. And then finally we'll have legendaries, which are going to work very similar to Legion, except these will be a lot more targetable. They'll come from specific places. You'll craft your legendary, and then these will have powers on them like old tier set bonuses, or Legion legendary bonuses, or new powers basically from the Torghast content and stuff coming in Shadowlands. You'll also get a little bit of player power back as you level up. You'll have spell ranks and abilities throughout the levels. These could be things like something that'll enhance a spell that you already have, or maybe you'll get back a spell that was removed in the past. That's going to be another way that you'll get a little bit more player power at least. So first up we have Shadow Priest, and this has received quite a lot of changes. The core of the gameplay will remain very similar. You're applying Shadow Word Pain, Vampiric Touch, but then you're also using your Mind Flame, Mind Blast in between keeping your dots up. What has changed though is Void Form. Void Form has been redesigned now. It's not this weird like insanity thing where you have to gain your insanity and drain it. Instead it's just going to be a cooldown. It's going to be a cooldown and a minute and a half cooldown. You'll go into it and you'll have a 20% damage increase. It'll last 15 seconds. It won't reduce the cooldown of Mind Blast anymore or give you that haste bonus, but what it will do is give you 2 charges of Mind Blast when you enter, and then it will go off and you'll still use your Void Eruption to enter Void Form, obviously on a 1.5 minute cooldown, and you'll still have Void Bolt as well. So that just gives you a little bit more kind of situational use of Void Form. You're not having to kind of hope it's up for a certain point in the fight. Now you have Void Form on demand for when you want it, which is great in my opinion. So you might be wondering, well, what's going on with Insanity now? Well, what they've decided to do is bring back Devouring Plague as a spell, and then they've attached an Insanity cost to Devouring Plague. It costs 50 Insanity, and it's going to do damage on cast and then have a 6-second dot period as well. So this is going to be your new Insanity gameplay. You're just going to build up Sanity or Insanity, and then cast Devouring Plague on targets, and that's going to be the way you bring your Insanity back down again. There's also been a rework to Shadowy Apparitions. Now any target afflicted by Vampiric Touch, whenever you cast Mind Blast, Devouring Plague, or Void Bolt, will make one of those apparitions move towards those targets impacted by Vampiric Touch and deal damage to them when they reach. And if you crit, you'll have 2 apparitions appear. So this is going to give you a little bit more gameplay around AoE situations or cleave situations as well. Definitely a nice change. And then on top of that, you also have your mastery change too. So your mastery will now be mastery shadow weaving, and your damage is increased by X% for each of the Shadow Word Pain, Vampiric Touch, and Devouring Plague on your target. And during Void Form, all targets receive the maximum benefit. So that's just going to reward you for playing your dots correctly and give you a little bit more niche situations where you can pump out extra damage when you have that Devouring Plague rolling on the target too. So it's going to reward having Devouring Plague up more also. And then also on top of all that, you've got quite a lot of talent changes. Now I'm not going to go through them all. A couple that stood out to me was Legacy of the Void. First of all, that's redesigned to bring back the old Void Form if you're a fan of that playstyle. Void Form won't have its duration, however during Void Form your Insanity will drain increasingly fast until it reaches 0 and Void Form ends. Void Form increases spell damage by an additional 5%, and while in Void Form you gain 1% haste every 2 seconds, and your Void Bolt will also refresh the duration of Devouring Plague. So if you took this, you'd want to have Devouring Plague on before you move into Void Form, and then use that Void Form or that Void Bolt to keep up Devouring Plague, and then try and keep it going as long as you can like you would previously. And then there's also Ancient Madness, which is a new talent I thought was kind of interesting. This entering Void Form increases your critical strike by 30% for 15 seconds and reducing by 2% every second. So if you want big boy damage at the start of a fight, you take Ancient Madness and you're going to be getting 30% crit, which is quite a lot. Obviously, it's going to progressively fall off. but for the first few seconds of a fight, you are going to be able to pump out big DPS. Next up is Enhancement Shaman, and this is something I played quite a lot in the past as well, so definitely happy to see some enhanced changes. And it's not really being changed, but more reverted. It's going back to how it kind of felt in WoD times, where you're going to have just Maelstrom weapon. Maelstrom as a resource is gone now, the kind of rage mechanic, so you won't be generating Maelstrom and dumping it on things like Lava Lash and Stormstrike anymore. Instead, you'll go back to being a cooldown reliant spec. So your rotation's going to look like Storm Strikes and Lava Lashes, using them off cooldown. You're going to be throwing up Flame Shocks and Frost Shocks. You'll be using Crash Lightning here and there as like a single target filler. You have Maelstrom weapon back, so you'll be using your 5 stacks on either Lightning Bolts or Chain Lightnings. They have made it so Maelstrom weapon stacks to 10 now. It won't use 10 stacks, it'll only ever use 5, but you kind of have that extra reserve if you don't want to overcap or you're banking for like a certain situation. So that's kind of nice to have, definitely feels better. Then you have things like Wind Fury weapon and Flame Tongue weapon back to buff your weapons, and it's been made a little bit smarter. It'll just automatically apply it to the weapon, you won't have to click the weapon. You have Wind Fury Totem as well, which will plop down, give you those extra chances for those auto attacks, and you'll have Lightning Shield baseline also. And then Chain Lightning and Crash Lightning have been made to kind of function together. They have synergy now, so you have a little bit more going on in AoE situations too. So overall, for me personally, it feels a lot better. Downsides is it does still have those kind of periods where you don't have anything to press, and I'm hoping more gear will help that out. And currently on beta, it does get its ass kicked a little bit during like leveling and stuff. But to be fair, that's kind of expected because Enhance has always felt a little bit weaker with low gear, and then as the expansion progresses, it feels better as you get more haste and stuff, and I think that's going to be a similar situation here. In terms of talents, once again, a lot of changes, and Enhance still kind of suffers like a lot of classes do, where there's just rows that don't really particularly do a whole lot, or there's only one talent choice really, and the others aren't really competitive. So hopefully that's something they get to later in the expansion. They take a look at a lot of spec talent trees, because for the most part you kind of set and forget a lot of talents, and that doesn't feel too great. And Enhance, even with the rework, still does have a lot of that being its problem. The next one to talk about is Affliction Lock, and while there's only a handful of changes, they're actually very impactful to the spec and the gameplay. So first of all, Unstable Affliction is no longer just like a dot you throw up and it costs soul shards. Instead, it's only going to work on one target, so you're only going to be able to put one up at a time, and it won't have any kind of cost. It still will keep its thing of when it kills a target, you'll get a soul shard back. That's going to stay the same, but now it's just going to be an extra dot that you'll be putting up on your single target situations. Next up is the thing that does impact a lot, and that's going to be Malefic Rapture. So this is your new soul shard dump, and every periodic effect you have on a target will make this spell do more damage. So if you have 3 dots up, it's going to do like 3 times the damage. It's also AoE though, so if you have 3 dots on one target, 2 dots on another, you're going to be doing like 3x damage on one target, 2x damage on another. So it's just going to give you a lot more interesting gameplay in both single target and AoE situations. So definitely something a lot of Warlocks are looking forward to. Then you'll also have Shadow Embrace baseline, and that's going to kind of replace your current damage amp. The way that'll work is Shadow Bolt, Horn, and Drain Soul will apply a stack of Shadow Embrace, increasing your damage dealt to the target by 3% for 10 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. And that only works on that current target, so you can't have like 3 targets or 3 stacks giving you 27% increased damage. It'll only ever be 9% against one target. And the weird thing about this as well is Drain Soul applies it per tick, so you can get 3 stacks up with Drain Soul in about 2 seconds, while with Shadow Bolt it's going to be taking you about 6 seconds. So it does make Drain Soul feel kind of a lot more fun and a little bit more mandatory to play with, just to get those stacks up faster so you're doing more damage. But either way, overall, definitely looking good for Affliction Warlocks. The next one to talk about is going to be Outlaw Rogue, and this one's going to be fairly short and sweet, but the changes are fairly impactful to the spec. So first up, you have Kidney Shot being baseline for Outlaw, and that does mean Between the Eyes is going to lose its stun mechanic, which some people like, some people don't. Instead, Between the Eyes will now gain a crit strike buff, so that buff duration will scale based on combo points spent, so you'll want to keep that up. Then we have Blade Flurry, and that is going to basically, when used, do instant damage now. It's just going to do an explosion of damage on top of what it did previously, but you won't have kind of charges of this anymore. So you're going to have longer durations between actually being able to use it. And then the bigger one is Roll the Bones. So that's no longer a combo point finisher. Instead, it's just going to have a flat energy cost, 45-second cooldown, and then whatever you roll now with that, it's going to last for 30 seconds, and that's it. You just deal with the buff that you get. So no more consistently rolling for the perfect set of buffs or whatever it is you're looking for, basically. And then also Roll the Bones is now being added to the passive of the things that Restless Blade reduces the cooldown of. So you'll typically end up with like a 25-30 second cooldown on Roll the Bones. You'll be able to use it essentially off cooldown. The next thing is something a few specs have wanted back for a while, and that's the ability to pick between two-handers and one-handers. So the first class impacted by this is going to be Monk, so Brewmaster Monk and Windwalker Monk are going to choose what weapons they want to use again, although it's not going to impact gameplay at all really. There might be one that's more damage, but in terms of rotation, etc., nothing's going to change there. Next up is going to be Fury Warrior. You'll now have the choice between Single-Minded Fury, which is 2 one-handers, or Titan's Grip, which is 2 two-handers. It's not really going to impact gameplay, but there is one that does pull ahead, and that is currently Titan's Grip. The reason for that, more damage, and also it's going to give you that bonus stamina from just having 2 two-handers. Meanwhile, Single-Minded Fury is only going to give you 5% movement speed as its bonus. So it depends on what you're after, if you want the one that's going to be a bit better, or you just want to have the 2 one-handers. But for these 2 specs, maybe it was better if they just made it like a transmog thing, and then there's not issues with like having to balance them or whatever. It probably would have made things a little bit easier. The other spec that's going to get this is going to be Frost Death Knight. Once again, you'll be able to choose between 2 one-handers or a 2-hander, although this is going to have gameplay impacting things. It actually has a passive that's going to give you kind of like a different approach to gameplay based on if you're using 2-handers or 1-handers. And right now it's looking to be that 2-hander will be stronger in single target situations, and then dual wield is going to be stronger in AoE. So you've got that to kind of look forward to. Maybe you don't like that, maybe you do. But if for people who really want to min-max, then you might have to end up having 2 different sets of weapons so that you can put on the right weapons depending on the situation. Now we're going to have a kind of quick fire round where I talk about some things that stood out to me, but I don't want to go into them in too much detail. First of all, Paladin. Paladin's receiving Holy Power back for both Holy and Prot. For the most part, it won't change too much for Holy Paladin, but obviously for Prot, it is going to have a little bit more of an older game style feel, where you'll build up Holy Power and then use that on either like a heal or more damage or a defensive, that kind of situation. And then we also have Deep Wounds change for Warrior, the Mastery. Instead of that just being a scaling dot now, it's also going to give you a flat damage increase against that target, so it's just going to make it feel nicer to play with. Then we also have Balance Druid, where alignments are now gone, and you're back to Eclipses, and the way you get into the Eclipse is by using kind of these 2 charges on either Wrath or Starfire, and you'll have those before you go into the fight, so you can instantly go into the Eclipse that you want to be in. A quick minor thing I wanted to touch on as well was Warlock and Hunter pets now have a 6-second res timer to get them back alive, but Warlocks will have a 3-minute CD that makes it a nearly instant res to get it back alive again. And then also Hunters have a increase to their stable size. It's now up to 200 pets, so plenty of room there now. And then the final 3 things I wanted to touch on. I didn't want to spend too much time on these because I feel like they've been heavily covered in other places, but I did want to mention them in case you don't know. So first of all is the unpruning. Basically Blizzard wanted to bring back spells that you had in the past that might be useful. Some of them are mostly useless. But for Death Knight, for example, you get Anti-Magic Zone back, which is a 20% magic damage that you can throw down the group can stand in. For Hunter, you get Kill Shot back. For Warrior, you're going to get Spell Reflect back. So there's definitely some spells in there that are useful, and I'll have a link to a post down below that's mostly accurate. That'll show you most of the spells that are returning. Next up is the GCD changes. Once again, something very welcome, and I'll have those on screen now. But basically, this is just spells that were previously on the GCD that aren't going to be, so you'll be able to press them and then instantly press another spell next to them. And those are mostly damage cooldowns that mainly amp things. They don't do damage themselves, they'll mainly just kind of buff your next spell or give you more damage on X or whatever. And then finally we have the target caps. This has been quite a controversial thing, but basically what this is say there's 10 enemies and your spell previously hit all 10. Maybe now in Shadowlands it'll only hit 6 of them or 5 of them or 8 of them. So you have a cap on how many targets certain spells can now hit. And I'll also have a link down in the description below to Limit Max's spreadsheet, which will run through all of the spells and their new target caps. And also gives you a bit of a better idea of how that's going to impact things overall. So definitely worth checking out if you're interested in seeing that. So that does bring us to the end of the video. And if you did enjoy it, throw me a sub or something because it is appreciated. It helps that number go bigger, makes me feel better. And don't worry too much if your class or spec wasn't talked about. It doesn't mean your class or spec hasn't received any changes. I just wanted to highlight the ones that stood out the most to me as changed, the ones that I thought would be more interesting to talk about in the video. But, you know, obviously there's been a lot of changes across the board. For example, some Azerite traits that have been removed have actually been turned into talents for certain specs, so the more popular stuff at least, like Glimmer. So yeah, don't worry too much. When you log into pre-patch, you are probably going to have new things to look at and be excited about. Outside of that, look out for more videos coming soon, especially Shadowlands stuff. Thanks for watching, guys. See ya!